All right, welcome back. Yes, we're turning our attention now to economic, money-related matters. Yeah, so, but we'll try and just go the easy way, such that, I mean, it's a holiday. People need to understand some basic things about finances in the country. We've got this morning with us Professor Banji Oyelaran Oyeyinka, who is an advisor to the president of the AFDB. Thank you for coming on this morning, sir.
Thank you.
Well, I know time and again the budget matters, economic matters, several policies, and most times it flies over the head of several people out there such that they don't even know how to proceed until, you know, certain policies hit them in terms of their implementation. And they just think, wow, how? You know, those kind of questions. But good to see that you got a book, From Consumption to Production, The Whys and Ways Out of Failed Industrialization in Nigeria, which we will come to. But if you could start with reacting to this headline we reviewed today in one of the dailies where the World Bank was saying Nigeria may sink deeper into poverty if we don't put certain things in place. Of course, they also do know that our population growth, they say, may hit 35 million in 10 years. So does it come to you as a surprise, this kind of headline?
No. Thank you very much for having me. It doesn't come to me as a surprise. These figures have been projected for a while now. There are 5 countries in the world that are contributing a lot to the growth of poverty. India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia. What we see is that by 2015, actually, half of all poor people in the world, extremely poor people, are in those 5 countries. The mitigating factor for the 2 Asian countries is that they are doing something about it. What you see with the World Bank report is a scenario where nothing is done. If we don't do anything, Nigeria will actually have about 25% of all poor people in the world by 2030. It's just 10 years from now. That's what it's saying. In other words, we're going to add another 30 million people to the poverty basket. But it's not destiny. Projections are meant to warn you. They are meant to call you to action so that we can do something about it. I believe Nigeria can do something about it. First of all, we need to rethink our dependence on oil. For example, last year, Nigeria earned $30 billion from oil. And when you look at all government revenue, revenue to GDP per capita, to GDP constitutes only about 8% of all our revenue base. Compared with other sub-Saharan African countries, most of them have doubled that. Kenya, 20%. So the basic issue is that our revenue base is very low. We need to expand that base. We need to go beyond oil. In fact, we need to go to zero oil. This should be our mantra now. So this is really the issue. All of the other issues that have been affected, our debt sustainability issues, for example.
Yeah, but Prof,
yes.
I know that, yes, it's something that if we don't have those revenue, they can implement the budgets and several other things. But before we even go to the taxation part of all of these things, is power. What can we ever achieve? Because if they focus on getting revenue from the people without, first of all, sorting out our power, energy challenge, you're going to squeeze the people. So I stand corrected because many have to think deep before they know who are those driving the energy power policy in the first instance. So do you get the sense that, look, there's an emergency in tackling that such that, you know, the economy can flourish?
No, in fact, when I talk about expanding the revenue base, I'm not talking about taxation. Taxation is just one of them. In fact, what we need to do, we need to go beyond reliance on oil. We need, for example, for me, the most important is the agro-industrial sector. We've failed very much to modernize and industrialize our agriculture. And when you look at, economists will tell you, this is actually what we call incomplete structural transformation. All countries move from agriculture. They move into industry and they move to services. If you look at the structure of Nigerian economy today, agriculture employs 40% of the workforce, but contributes only 25% of GDP. Services, telecom, hotels, and all that, almost 50%. But the problem there is that services doesn't employ as much as manufacturing. So the warning between agriculture and services, which is manufacturing, industrial manufacturing, which is traditionally, in all history and in all countries, had been the major creator of jobs and productivity, had been neglected. This is really the issue. In fact, that's where when I say expand the base, that is the problem.
Prof,
We need to expand industrial base.
In terms of expanding that base,
Yeah.
what has been our hindrance? I've been hearing about agriculture since 1978 with Operation Feed the Nation, propounded by the head of state at the time. And that evolved into the Green Revolution of the Second Republic. Prior to that was the First Republic, where the three main regions profited and prospered largely on agriculture. So over the past 20 years, we've had consistent democracy. So it's not like, change of government has been. So what is mitigating against us setting a structure that will help us to focus on agriculture as a mainstay? Because it has worked for us before.
No, thank you. Agriculture had never been really a business, predominantly. Our agricultural sector, small farms, low yield, poor technology, low skill, they are very similar to the urban economy, which is also informal.
But it worked for us in the First Republic.
It worked for us at that time because our need was very little compared with now. Our population have grown. The sophistication of the urban market has grown. When you look at what we have and what others have done, let me expand a bit. In the 80s, United Textiles employed over 1 million people. When I talk about agriculture, I'm talking of also agriculture as a contributor of input factors to industry. Cotton, textile, garment, leather, bags, shoes, cassava to starch. That is the progression from pure subsistence agriculture into agriculture as a business. Last year, and this is an example I've quoted a lot for many people, the Netherlands exported $90 billion of agro-food. It's a subsector of manufacturing. $90 billion. Nigeria got $30 billion from oil. Last year, the contribution of agribusiness to U.S. economy was $1 trillion, 2.5 times overall GDP of Nigeria. This is what I mean by translation or transformation from pure agriculture as we know it to agribusiness. Yes, we did well for the time we were in the 60s and 70s, but we lost it. We didn't build on those gains that we had. Textile moved on to Asia. We now import, in fact, a lot of people import Ankara from Akosombo and all those, very strange things we have done to ourselves. So this is really the point you made. Beyond the low yield of our agricultural sector, we also never modernized it into a big business. And what you find in structural transformation is that as you modernize agriculture, less labor is in agriculture. The whole of the U.S. labor force in agriculture is probably 2 to 3%. We still have 40%, but we still can't feed ourselves. Our import bill is still very high. Our dependence on other people's goods and services is still very high. So what has happened is that we did not move beyond what we were doing, and in fact we lost ground. There are 3 products you can have from agriculture inputs, either raw materials, semi-processed, or processed. The world has moved beyond that. What we do now, we are still exporting raw cassava to China, people export raw cashew. We have everything that could constitute the base for a great economy. And this, for me, is the expansion of the base. It's not so much taxation. Taxation should be fair.
Yeah, but can we expand this base without, stable, meeting our power?
And that's a very important point you made. This is another failure of our country. The power sector is a very strange thing to many of us. That we are not. This is a second industrial revolution technology that we have not been able to master. So I think that is a failure we must correct very quickly if we're going to industrialize very rapidly, which is, for me, the only path to development. you have to industrialize all sectors. In other words, apply techniques, innovations of modern times to all those sectors that remain primitive. What you find in our agriculture is still few people within families struggling to work 20 hours a day, whereas when you apply modern techniques, half an hour will do the same job that 20 people have been doing for 1 month. So this is really where the problem lies.
If I could, go back a little bit to some of the times that you mentioned how we succeeded and how we're struggling, limping now. Yeah. In this book of yours, you said, just looking at that summary, where you say planners were not well informed about industrial policies and therefore they mismanaged them. Yeah. So was it the same thing at that time or is prevalent now?
I think to a large extent, and it saddens me to say this, Nigeria hardly deploys its best to solve its problems. What you find chronicled in this book is 40 years of my own experience in this book. You find almost all the major projects we undertook, iron and steel, aluminium, all of fertilizers. I was with the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research for many years, and we used to monitor all these projects. I just decided one day to catalog all my past experience before I completely forget them, But yeah, you're right. We even did better in those days in using our own people to solve a lot of our both agricultural and industrial. We used to consult a lot with universities. We consult a lot with knowledgeable people. Somehow along the way, we lost that culture. And, but the other dimension of the problem is that things work elsewhere. But when it gets here, it simply doesn't work. Why? To be honest with you, I think it's more of vested interest and lack of devotion to state developmental goals of our country. The president or whoever can wish all he wants. But if you don't have the capacity at the bureaucratic level and several other levels, a lot of failure you find in this book is at those levels.
Let's get to Abuja. I think Makwe has some questions for you, Prof. Makwe.
We have been told over and over again, you talked about Nigeria going beyond oil. And it would seem that we have been hearing diversification for a while now. And I think it was pressed, the message came home even stronger when we began to experience a decline in the price of crude oil, so much so that we had to borrow heavily to fund past budgets. But would you say that some of the steps that we've taken to diversify the economy, if you're seeing any at all, will yield fruit anytime soon? I don't know, where would you say we are now, looking at it from the eye of an economic expert?
Thank you very much. I think the present government is laying the right emphasis of doing agriculture, of going back to it. As a matter of fact, we've been working with the government, Africa Development Bank, on establishing what we call the special agricultural, special agro-industrial processing zones. That's one of the reasons I've been around for almost 2 weeks. We just reached an agreement with the government, with the Minister of Finance, to finance special agro zones in about 6 zones in the country. It's a massive undertaking that the bank president is committed to. You know him very well. This is something he has been preaching all over Africa. We're actually in about 15 countries now. I'm leading and coordinating some of these efforts. For example, in Kenya, they are building 6 agro zones. In Ethiopia, I was there in April. They are building 4 zones. It's very similar to free zones that you find in, say, Ogungwandon, but it's devoted only to agribusiness, cotton, textiles, food processing, and so forth. The bank is putting a massive amount of money behind it. So I think the government is having the right emphasis. The Minister of Finance and Minister of Water Resources, Agriculture, I met with all of them, and they're extremely supportive of this. And we hope this will actually help push things in the right direction, as I said earlier, in modernizing agriculture, reducing post-harvest losses, attenuating the infrastructure deficit that we have in our country, because this is really the solution that is provided when you build a special agro zones such as we have in mind. You try to then reduce the risk to private business. You try to take off from them their own expenses, so they are incentivized to come and invest in those zones. We've seen this work in many countries. In South Korea, for example, they have over 400 agro zones. In Vietnam, they have hundreds of them. So this is nothing new. It's been done in India. Why we haven't done it earlier, for me, is a mystery. But we hope that with this emphasis and with this new impetus to modernize agriculture, this will help our country.
I mean, they have an attempt to modernize certain aspects and also get Nigerians to consume certain foods that are produced here. Mr. Additional is no stranger. He started Nigeria self-sufficient, the movement for Nigeria self-sufficiency in rice production. Yeah. And only recently, the Nigerian government shut its borders so as to sanitize that particular sector to ensure that more of what is produced here is consumed here. I'd like you to react to that border closure and the effect you think it had on the Nigerian economy.
At every point in at a point in every country's history, you have to make a decision. I mean, this is really and policies such as this will involve losers. You have losers, you have gainers. The border closure with Benin, if you cast your mind back, it's been a long-running issue, right from Obasanjo's time. The discussion has been ongoing. It's nothing that surprised me, for example. But I also believe that the closure is temporary. For us, I think it gives us a window to negotiate the ECOWAS protocol more correctly. It's very difficult to have a country beside you repackaging 3 years' rice and then sending it to your country. I think it's very difficult. I don't know what other steps had been taken earlier to solve this problem. I know it's a very controversial move. If we do it right and ensure that we also build internal capacity to take advantage of production within the country, this temporary closure, I'm sure, will help us. But also, I think a lot also depends on Nigerians themselves. We need to also be a bit more patriotic. I'm not talking of nationalism, closing doors and all that. All countries have done this in the past. They've created some barrier with a non-tariff or barriers as we know it with border closure. If you look into history, every country had done it. I don't want to cite specific examples, but I want to believe that we ourselves, we need to look inwards and look ourselves in the mirror and say, are we really doing our country the service? I had people say they are more comfortable importing clothing from Akosombo and all that. It's something we need to think carefully about. Talking about consuming what we produce, we need to be a bit more inward-looking, I believe, to ensure that we produce within.
Okay. Yeah, Prof, you said earlier that you have some agreements with some ministers, government officials at the federal level at this time. Usually, and this is where my fear is, and perhaps the fear of many people, it's not in the paucity of ideas, it's not in the paucity of agreements, but it's in the sustenance or sustainability of those agreements beyond each government. What's the plan?
So, you are very right. Learning from the lessons of the past, our idea is to ensure that this is actually private sector-led. The whole point of having, in fact, we started discussion in April. And when you look into this book, you will see that I'm coming from that same mental set. It's not positive ideas. We have great ideas, right from our first development plan. But the way we execute these ideas and the nature of vested interest in our country had crippled a lot of good ideas. So this particular special agro-industrial zone is going to be driven by private people. In fact, we started by talking to private sector actors. We had a series of meetings. with all the big names, you know, Dangote, Flour Mill, all of them. Then we proceeded to also talk to, why did we talk to government agencies also? Because so that everybody works together. One of the big issues with government coordination is fight over turf, fight over ownership. We own it. So, and I'm happy to say that we're able to speak to that issue and agree that this is a Nigerian plan. It doesn't belong to a particular ministry or MDA. So we hope, and then we've also involved a lot of more credible national agencies to administer the funding. It's not going to be business as usual.
How is this going to work?
Basically what you do is the funding from the Africa Development Bank itself is for the infrastructure. As you know, a zone or a special agglomeration of where you actually try to incentivize companies to invest in has to have a couple of things. One is basic physical infrastructure, roads, water, telecom, and so forth. This we are going to provide in those zones. It's like the old site and service. When you want to build an estate, put the road, put the gutter, put everything, and people build. So it's a very simple, basic idea that has worked for hundreds of years. So we are going to, the bank's funding will be to build those infrastructure. And then, but beyond that, what we have done is we are not going to greenfield. We are going to brownfields. In other words, where things are already happening. So this is why we spoke first with private actors who are already on ground. Okay. For example, where someone is already producing cocoa or producing rice, we build those zones around those areas. So that makes things a bit easier. We shorten the time of planning and so forth. Yeah.
So is there, in the next 3, 4, 5 months, what's the plan?
So the plan in the next, we hope that from now on, from January, we are going to have a lot of what we call appraiser missions to visit those sites specifically and do feasibility studies. And that hopefully by June, we believe we should begin to talk about disbursing the funds. We've already identified the sites, about 6 zones, cutting across all states of our country. We have first phase and the second phase. First phase starts 2020, second phase starts 2021. We believe strongly, with all the right support, that in the next 18 months, people will begin to see these zones on ground.
What then is the role of government in all of this?
So government role, as you see, for example, is to, government will take the loan, for example. It's a long-term loan, 40-year loan, which is, if you use it well, it's almost like a gift, really. So they have to take the loan. But beyond that, we also have partners like Bank of Industry, Afri-Exim, all of whom have pledged to support every company that comes to locate in those zones. So once we put the structures on ground, we've secured all this coordinating partnership that will then ensure that companies get low interest rate to come and put their factories, whether you want to convert cassava to starch, whether you want to process, whether you have textile, from cotton to textile and so forth. So these are the preliminary work that we've been doing for the past 6 months, and we think we are on the right course.
All right, we'll leave it on that good note. We like good news, particularly this season. So we're hoping that, that will keep going on and ensure that people benefit tremendously from this one. So well, thank you for coming on this morning. And this is a good book. I think people should grab a copy if you can. Professor Banji Oyelaron Yeyinka is advisor to the president of the AFDB. Thank you for your thoughts and your time this morning.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll be back in a moment, but we won't be talking politics or business or any of such things. So you find out in just a moment.